Where are you watching us from? I'm here, with us in this space that seems so quiet, but for someone else it could be the worst storm imaginable. Why do I say that? Because this is a story about silences that are misinterpreted and about voices that need to be heard. Pay close attention because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about respect and empathy. And if this story grabs you, if it makes you feel what these characters felt, promise me, you'll subscribe. Promise you won't miss the next story. Because stories like this need to be told. Frankfurt Airport was a place of encounters and farewells, of smiles and tears. A stage for human drama, where thousands of stories intersect every day. But the story we are going to tell today is not about a happy reunion, but about a soldier's reunion with his homeland in a silent farewell. The plane landed. The crew already knew what was going to happen. The captain made an announcement, asking for respect and silence. At the back of the plane was a soldier's coffin, covered with his country's flag, and next to it was Ethan, a 25-year-old man in an impeccable uniform. Ethan was responsible for escorting the coffin of Sergeant William, who had lost his life on a peacekeeping mission. Ethan was a man of few words. He had a serious expression, but his deep green eyes seemed to carry the weight of the world. He was autistic, with a condition known as Asperger's syndrome. He didn't like eye contact, loud noises, or crowds. But he was a genius at everything he did, especially in his profession. At first, the flight crew didn't understand Ethan's behavior. He didn't smile or talk. He just stood there, silent, like a statue. The flight attendant, Maria, an older woman with a heart of gold, tried to approach him. "Can I offer you anything? A glass of water? Some juice?" Ethan, without looking at her, just shook his head. Maria, who was a sensitive person, understood that he didn't want to be bothered. But her boss, Erica, a younger woman with an air of superiority, didn't understand. She found Ethan's behavior disrespectful. Erica approached him, her voice irritated. "Don't you have any manners? The flight attendant is trying to help you. Say thank you." Ethan, panicked, turned his face to the window. He felt his heart beating faster. He felt fear, he felt anger, and he felt shame. Ethan's silence, which was his only way of communicating with the world, was interpreted as arrogance by Erica. She, who had no idea that he was autistic, continued, "Do you know what that uniform means? Do you know what the coffin you're escorting means? You're representing your country, and your country isn't represented by rude people like you." Erica's words were like knives in Ethan's heart. He felt his face flush, his hands tremble. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't rude, that he was just different, but the words wouldn't come out. He heard the sound of the plane's engine, the sound of Erica's voice, the sound of his own heart, all mixing together in an unbearable cacophony. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to focus on the only sound that calmed him, his own breathing, but it didn't work. He felt like he was going to explode. He felt like he was going to collapse. And that's when the unexpected happened. Sergeant William's coffin, which was on the floor, covered with the flag, slipped a little. Ethan, without hesitation, threw himself on the floor to hold it. He held it with the strength of someone holding on to his own life. And he said, in a broken but clear voice, "I'll protect him with my life." Erica, who was shocked by the scene, remained silent. She didn't know what to say. And Maria, the flight attendant, approached Ethan with a look of compassion. She gently touched his shoulder without saying a word. And Ethan, who didn't like to be touched, didn't pull away. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. Erica realized then that her ignorance had almost cost her her humanity, and that Ethan's silence was not arrogance, but pain, and that his way of loving, his way of respecting, was different, but it was real. Ethan grew up in a home full of love, but also challenges. His parents, Robert and Laura, always knew he was different. From an early age, he didn't like to be touched. The sound of the vacuum cleaner made him cry. The smell of perfume suffocated him. He spent hours and hours organizing his toy cars in perfect rows. His parents, with the help of doctors and therapists, understood that he was autistic. The diagnosis was a shock at first, but Robert and Laura decided that they would not treat Ethan's autism as a disease. They would treat it as a part of him. They decided that they would create a world where Ethan could flourish. The biggest challenge for Ethan has always been communication. He had difficulty expressing himself, saying what he felt, and he had difficulty understanding the emotions of others. Because of this, he isolated himself. Silence became his comfort zone, but his passion has always been logic. The logic of math, physics, engineering, and the logic of war. Since he was a child, Ethan had been fascinated by everything related to military strategy. He spent hours and hours playing board games that simulated battles. He knew the war tactics of Sun Tzu and Napoleon Bonaparte by heart. His parents, who were middle class, struggled to give him the best education possible. They enrolled him in a military school. At first, the school didn't want to accept him, but Robert and Laura insisted. They said that Ethan's autism was not a weakness, but a strength, that his brain, which worked differently, could see war in a way that no one else could. And they were right. Ethan excelled at military school. He became the best student, the best strategist. He was the first to solve the most complex problems. He was the first to see the solution in a battle. He became a leader, a silent leader. But communication was still a problem. His classmates, who didn't understand his silence, saw him as a stranger. They teased him and isolated him. Ethan suffered in silence. But he had a friend, Mark, a classmate who was fatherless. Mark was a soldier, and he understood Ethan's silence. He understood that Ethan's silence was his way of concentrating, his way of thinking. The friendship between Ethan and Mark was quiet. They didn't talk much, but they understood each other. They played chess. They talked about military strategy, and they protected each other. Mark protected Ethan from bullies, and Ethan protected Mark by giving him strategic advice during their games. But Mark died in the war, and Ethan's pain was immense. He felt guilty. He felt responsible. He thought he could have done something to save him. The pain was so great that he couldn't speak. He closed himself off even more, and that's when he became responsible for escorting Mark's body. He didn't want to do it, but he felt it was his last chance to do something for him, his last chance to honor his memory. He was there, escorting his friend's coffin, carrying not only the weight of the coffin, but the weight of guilt, the weight of pain, and the weight of his autism, the weight of not being able to talk about any of it. After Sergeant Williams' death, or Mark, as we knew him, the Army offered Ethan psychological support, but help wasn't really what he needed. At first, the psychologist didn't understand his behavior. You need to talk about your friend's death. You need to externalize your pain. But Ethan couldn't. He couldn't put into words what he was feeling. For him, the pain was a black hole, a void, and words weren't enough to fill that void. And the psychologists who didn't understand autism saw Ethan's silence as a problem. They thought he was in denial. They thought he was avoiding the pain. They thought he needed to be forced to talk. If you don't talk, the pain will consume you. You'll end up losing yourself. And they used techniques that Ethan found invasive. They tried to make eye contact with him. They tried to touch him. They tried to force him to talk. And that only made him shut down even more. He felt like a caged animal, being forced to do something he couldn't do. The false hope that conventional therapy would fix Ethan was one of the biggest mistakes the Army psychologists made. They didn't understand that Ethan didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be accepted. He needed someone who understood his silence, someone who understood that his way of dealing with pain was different, and what he really needed was a way to honor his friend's memory. He needed a purpose, he needed a mission, and that's when he volunteered to escort his friend's body. The senior officer, a man named General Ivanov, didn't want Ethan to go. He didn't think Ethan was in any condition to do it, but Ethan, who had never spoken about it before, said, "I need to do this. I promised him I would protect him. I need to protect him until the end." General Ivanov, who didn't know what to say, felt the sincerity in Ethan's voice. He felt the pain, and he understood that this was Ethan's only way of dealing with his grief. He allowed Ethan to go. False hope turned into truth. The truth that grief is not a linear process. The truth that each person deals with pain in a different way. The truth that healing is not the absence of pain, but rather the acceptance of pain. The truth that Ethan didn't need conventional therapy. He needed a mission. He needed a purpose. He needed a way to honor his friend's memory. He needed a way to say goodbye. And his way of saying goodbye was his silence. The airline, Skyline International, was the picture of professionalism, but its policies were strict. They had a procedure manual for everything, and there was no manual for dealing with autistic people. The customer service director, Catherine, was Erica's boss. She was a woman of rules, policies, and bureaucracy. After the incident with Ethan, Erica was summoned to Catherine's office. Erica, who felt humiliated, tried to defend herself. "Catherine, the man was rude. He ignored me. He didn't answer me. And he was responsible for a coffin. He couldn't behave so strangely." Catherine, who was sitting at her desk, listened to Erica carefully. She looked at the report Erica's team had made. The report said that Ethan was a difficult passenger and that he had been disrespectful. "Erica, our job is to serve the customer. It's not to judge the customer, and our policy says that the customer is always right." Erica was angry. "The customer wasn't right. He was wrong. He insulted me, and he didn't say a word." Catherine sighed. "Erica, do you know why he didn't say a word? Because he's autistic. The Army informed us that he's autistic, and that he has difficulty communicating, and that he's sensitive to sounds, lights, and physical contact." Erica was speechless. Shame consumed her. She felt she had made a serious mistake. The human conflict was real. Catherine, with her rules and policies, didn't want to damage the company's image, but she also didn't want to ruin an employee's life. And Erica, in her ignorance, had judged and offended a person who was suffering. And that's when General Ivanov entered the scene. He called the airline. He spoke to Catherine. He said that the Army would sue the airline for discrimination, and that they would expose the case in the media. Catherine, panicked, tried to calm General Ivanov down. "General, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was autistic. I didn't know he had this condition, but now I do, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." General Ivanov, who was not a man of many words, said, "You will not make sure it doesn't happen again. You will change your company's policy. You will train your staff to deal with people with disabilities. You will make sure your company is inclusive. And if you don't, the Army will make sure your company never flies one of our soldiers again." The human conflict was the dilemma between policy and empathy, between prejudice and inclusion, between ignorance and wisdom. And General Ivanov, with his threat, had forced the airline to choose empathy, to choose inclusion, to choose humanity. After her conversation with General Ivanov, Catherine was in shock. She didn't know what to do. She felt that her company's reputation was at stake, and she felt that her own reputation was at stake. But what shocked her most of all was her own ignorance. She, the director of customer service, didn't know how to serve a customer who was different. She felt she had failed in her mission. Catherine, in a moment of reflection, called General Ivanov. She said she wanted to meet with Ethan. General Ivanov, who at first didn't want to, agreed. Catherine met Ethan at a quiet restaurant. They sat down at a table facing each other. Catherine, who was a woman of words, didn't know what to say. Ethan, who was a man of few words, didn't know either. Catherine, her voice breaking, said, "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what my team did. And I'm sorry for judging you. I didn't know you were autistic. I didn't know you had this condition. I'm sorry." Ethan, who was silent, just looked at her. He looked at her face, at her eyes. He saw her sincerity, and he, for the first time, smiled. A shy but sincere smile. And what he did next left Catherine in shock. He, who barely spoke, took a piece of paper out of his pocket and placed it on the table. On the paper was written, "I forgive you. I know you didn't know, and I know you didn't mean to hurt me. I know you're a good person." Catherine, who was in tears, didn't know what to say. She looked at the paper, at Ethan's perfect handwriting. She looked at his face, at his smile, and she felt healed. Healed from her ignorance, her prejudice, her arrogance. The silent turning point had happened. Ethan's note wasn't just an apology. It was a lesson about empathy, about forgiveness, about humanity, and the most important lesson of all, that someone's silence is not the absence of a voice, but the presence of a voice that has not yet been heard, and that to hear that voice, we must have an open heart. After her conversation with Ethan, Catherine changed. She changed her company's policy. She created an inclusion program for people with disabilities. She trained her team to deal with people with autism, and she made Ethan the program's consultant. At first, Erica's team, the flight attendants, resisted. They didn't want to follow the rules of a stranger. But Catherine, with Ethan's help, changed their minds. Ethan, with his talent for logic, created a procedure manual for the team. The manual wasn't about what to do. It was about what to feel. It taught the team to listen with their hearts. It taught the team to read body language. It taught the team to respect silence. And the manual was written in a way that even the most skeptical people could understand. Ethan's small victory was much more than a procedure manual. It was the victory of being seen, of being heard. It was the victory of having his voice, his authentic voice, recognized. And it was the victory of showing everyone at the airline that he was much more than a janitor. He was a human being with incredible talent. The flight attendant, Erica, who had initially judged him, became one of his biggest advocates. She apologized to him, she thanked him, and she looked at him not with pity, but with admiration. Ethan's life, which had once been lonely, became full of purpose. He helped people, he taught people, he became a leader, a silent leader, and his voice, which had once been silenced, became the voice of empathy. Ethan's story teaches us that empathy is not an emotion, but a choice. It is the choice to listen to what is not said. It is the choice to see what is not shown. It is the choice to respect difference. It is the choice to love. Catherine, the customer service director, became one of the biggest advocates for inclusion. She used Ethan's story to change the culture of her company. She used Ethan's story to show everyone that autism is not a disease, but a strength. She used Ethan's story to show everyone that true strength does not lie in being like others, but in having the courage to be who you are. And Ethan, seeing Catherine's transformation, felt loved. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was not only accepted, but valued. He felt part of something. He felt human. Ethan's reflection was not just about the world. It was about himself. He wondered how many times he had judged a person by their appearance, by their behavior. How many times he had ignored someone's silence, thinking it was empty. He regretted judging Erica at first, for thinking about firing her. He felt ashamed. Ethan's transformation wasn't just external, it was internal. He began to be a more humane, more empathetic leader. He began to care about his coworkers, to listen to what they had to say, even if it was in silence. He created an inclusion program at the company, a program that wasn't just for people with autism, but for everyone who felt different. He remembered Olga's words. Love doesn't try to change who you are, it helps you be the best version of yourself. He understood that love, true love, wasn't just for family and friends. It was for everyone, for the janitor, for the manager, for the customer, for the world. And Igor, seeing Maximilian's transformation, felt loved. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was not only accepted, but valued. He felt part of something. He felt human. Life at Ethelred Solutions changed. The office, which had once been a quiet and formal place, became a place of conversation and laughter. People became more open. They felt comfortable being who they were. Igor, who had previously gone unnoticed, was now the center of attention. He helped with negotiations and translated documents. He was the backbone of the company, but most importantly, he felt happy. But Igor's life did not become a fairy tale. His autism was still there. He still had sensory crises. He still needed white noise to calm down. He still had difficulty making eye contact, but he was no longer alone. He had a friend, Maximilian. He had a team that supported him. He had a purpose. Igor's story shows us that hope is not the absence of pain, but rather the presence of tools to deal with it. Igor still felt the pain of autism, but he had the tools to navigate life. He had his passion for languages. He had the support of his mother, Olga, and he had the acceptance of Maximilian and the entire company. Igor's story is not about curing autism. It is about accepting autism. It is about the beauty that exists in difference. It is about the power of silence. And it is about the voice that exists in each of us, even if it is not spoken. What Igor's story teaches us is that true strength does not lie in being like others, but in having the courage to be who you are, even if that is different. And that true wisdom does not lie in knowing everything, but in having the humility to listen. Not all love speaks, but all true love listens. If this story touched you, like it, comment, and subscribe. Someone may need to hear this today.